Yes, I was born and raised like in Charity. I've been living here all my life. The way I heard Charity Church got its name, and the rest of it was named after, as far as I know, that my grandfather Robson gave the land, and they put up a log church. And when they got through, they said, "What are we going to call this church now?" And they said, "Let's call it Charity, because all of us have given our help." And that is the same as Charity. It was called many more names before that. First was the Smith River Meeting House. Then it went to the Bartlett Meeting House. And that was in 1778. Then they called it the New Hope on Smith River. Then the Charity Meeting House. And in 1820, Elijah D. Hart deeded land to the church site. In 1870 or 71, my grandfather, Lavin Robson, deeded more land around the present house and the Mariposa Cemetery to Charity. This man, Lavin Robson, was my grandfather. And we had a post office here, and Reverend W.A. Elkin was pastor. He was pastor then, but he was the postmaster. As long at the Charity Post Office. And then he went from there to Rome. Tell me what you remember about the old-fashioned store. There with kisses, candy kisses wrapped up, and I went round there and got me some kisses in a box of cakes. Someone was in the store there, some man, and my dad was in the side room. My dad came back, this man told that I had come in and got some cakes and candy. So I looked behind me, and there come my dad after me. He went down behind the house and with a little switch, and he said to me, "You can have all the cakes and candy you want, but remember, you will have to ask for it." And my dad ran the store until he died, which was in 1914. And that was when I saw my first Model T Ford. I.D. Hart came and took my dad to the hospital in Richmond, and where he only lived a week. And after he died, my uncle came in and run the store. When he was helping my dad before he died, anyway, it was known as P.H.G.L. Robson Store in Charity. And after my dad died, he took it over by himself. And later on, he had to go into the First World War. And when he went, another uncle came, my mother's brother, and kept running the store there for many years. And then after my mother gave up the store, my sister and her husband, Mita and Lily Markle, run the store for 38 years, from 1929 to 1967. Remember anything else about your neighborhood and home back in those days? Oh, I just remember it was good old country life, and we all had to work. We enjoyed it. You still feel close to the people in your area, don't we? Oh, yes, but we don't have these people that were here years and years ago. Because I can remember my brother-in-law that ran the store telling how many families that had died out since he began that store, which all the old folks are gone, and now we're the old folks. What are you most proud of in Patch County? Well, I'd say the roads, good roads we have, and the good schools for people, and the way to get around, because roads were really something back in the days when I was growing up. Because we didn't have any movies or anywhere to go to. We'd go to Dayton. We had to drive 10 miles to get a Coca-Cola on Sunday evening. And we rode to Endicott to Dances, which was 10 miles away, in the Model T Fords, and roads were muddy, and we just had one rut to drive in case you met a car. You was quite something to get by. And I used to drive, I drove a Model T up Woods Gap Mountain, which was just a very narrow road. And if you had heard a car, we had to stop in the mountain and fill it up with water. And if you stop to see if you could hear a car coming with a deer, you had to stay parked there till they could get by. There's only one place in that mountain that we could park, or could get by, or even park after move past the car.
About J.P. Stevens, how do you feel about the changes in the county?
Well, I say J.P. has really done something for Patrick County and Woolwine and Charity. And I had people coming from Fair by my house, and I know when they're passing, if they're going to the electric plant, we used to call it, to work, and I know when they come back what time it is, even if I'm asleep, because so many cars pass going, and I think it's really done something for Patrick County.
What organizations do you belong to?
Well, the one that I'm the most proud of is the Golden Age Club of Eden, North Carolina. And I have been belonged to that about 9 years. And we have been on many, many trips. We go to Hawaii, California, New Orleans, Pennsylvania, Canada, Niagara Falls, Wilmington, Delaware, Wilmington, North Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, to the Grand Ole Opry, Philadelphia, and the last trip we made, the Bahamas, out on the boat. And we really enjoy these trips. Now we have a senior citizen van that comes by and picks us up and takes us out on Wednesdays. And I belong to that Home Demonstration Club, our Sewing Circle Club, and have a WMU church, and it's somewhere something to go all the time. And back in the olden days, we had nothing like this.
Do you remember your parents or grandparents making you clothes, furniture, sofa, shoes, tools, anything?
Oh, yes. I remember I made soap after I was married, so that shows I'm very old. But my mother made all of our clothes, and as I turned, my dad died at the age of 40 and left my mother with 7 children from 9 months old to 10 years old. And I did have an older brother that died at 8 years old. And the way he died, we had a horse block at a store, and when people would come to the store, my dad would have my little brother to go out and hitch the horses for the women. And he got up on one of the horses and was riding the fence to hitch it, and he fell off backwards and hurt his head, and he died in that from the fall.
You once worked at the hospital. R.J. Patrick Hospital.
I worked there 7 years.
A dietitian.
A dietary supervisor. Yeah, I drove 40 miles. But before that, I worked in the WPA sewing room for 5 years. Was in charge of 15 women. Did all kinds of work then. We made carded wools, we made quilts, we pieced quilts, we sewed, we made all kinds of women's clothes, and men's jackets and overalls. I guess we made hundreds of pairs of overalls. And the government furnished us 2 sewing machines, and I furnished mine. And these women, some of them were 60 and 65 years old at that time, walked 7 and 8 miles to work and back for less than $1 a day. I think I got $1 a day. And when anybody would come by selling fruit or apples or something, we'd buy us a bushel all together, and each one of us would eat 1 apple a day, so we could all get the same amount.
And you were born and raised here in this community?
Yes, sir. Born right here, lived here in the mile of my home place all my life.
You work at many arts and crafts.
Oh, yes, I love to do arts and craft work and handwork of all kinds. when I was working, I taught school for 26 years, and when I'd come home at night, so I'd relax, I would have to crochet or do something to get settled down. So I crocheted an awful lot and made a lot of quilts. I guess I made 250 quilts, and I'm real happy to say I have one sale now for $300. That makes me feel proud that I do have some good quilts. And I make crochet women's scarves, at least 50, and I make caps, I make men's ties. So 60 sometimes on Christmas that I make. And crocheted afghans, about 40 for people. And I make baby afghans, bedside bedspreads. And I made baby quilts, many quilts for babies. When I was teaching school, every time somebody had a baby, I would make it a quilt, and I still do that. That's the quilts. And that was where I got calls from Richmond, Marks, don't want to buy the double wedding ring quilt. I have another cross this quilt made. Well, I started putting pieces of quilt when I was a kid. But my first real quilt that I ever made was a broken star. My mother worked at these quilts, but I was with her. I had an older sister, and a lot of those quilts, but that's only two of us, 6 girls that really care about creating a piece of quilts. She had done a lot for quilts. We didn't have, yeah, my son was in World War II. Two uncles. The wall had eaten. I had didn't for a while. Worried about our uncles because he was one of the second in the store there when I met him. Many people leave after 10 years more to fight and work for them. Well, I wouldn't know about that. Because that, but I knew all the folks around charity had to go to war. And my husband just was registered to go in the Second World War. But he was too old and he didn't get in there. Have any of you people moved into your area recently? Oh, yes. The old homes around here where people, so it's filled up now with all the new people mostly from New Jersey. We have from Long Island, New York, and from Maryland, and we had a new couple come in yesterday, and they moved in from Martinsville, Ridgeway, and all around they're building new houses and having trailers. Do you think the people in the county next door to see a home? Oh yes, I think that's really. I think everyone likes it. Yes, they're nice people.
you born at home or in the hospital?
Oh, there wasn't no state when the hospital had the baby back in those days. My mother had 8 children, all were born at home, and I had all of mine at home.
What has changed most about your life in Patrick County? Around the time this, and neighbors and relatives and work?
Well, we used to have time when my children was growing up. In the afternoons, we'd go out and visit, take them and walk and go visit. Go spend the night or spend the day. But anymore, there's no one around for you to visit close by because they all work.
Mm-hmm. When did your family get his first car? Telephone, running water, and electricity. So forth.
I know I didn't get running water in my house until 1950. But I had telephone before that, electricity. But I didn't have running water.
What about the first car?
First car we had mother bought for us was about 1915 or 16. My older sister drove.
Our families is close today. This is where it old time.
It doesn't seem what families are, yes, I think they are, but of course there's not time anymore like it used to be to visit.
Did the children have more than you did when you were growing up? And how do you think this will affect them?
Oh yes, I think children have too much these days, as I can say, because you want to give them a gift, you can't find anything to give them. They've got everything to buy. And when we were growing up, if we got one little gift, little doll, that was all we got. I remember very well the last doll that I ever had, that my sister broke its head. I never had a doll after that.
Some of the roads in Patrick County changed things, and how do you feel these changes have been good?
I feel they've been wonderful because the road has been changed since I moved here, this house, because it was dirt road when I moved here. It really has made a lot of difference to people, man.
And you still have family reunions.
Oh, yes. We look forward to that once a year. We had to finish, I was a Robinson before I married, and we have had 25 to 26 family reunions, and sometimes we have over 300 there. And they're most all Robinsons, and they come from Kentucky, Maryland, West Virginia, Texas, and Connecticut, Tennessee, and all places around.
Do you think the young people still respect the elders as much as when you were growing up?
Well, it don't seem like it quite, because you hear people saying, oh, when you get old, you got to go to the nursing home. Years ago, they didn't have a nursing home, but you took care of your parents in your home. And now, I don't think any of them would take time to take care of you in the hospital, in your home, since you got nursing homes to go to. Of course, they can't wait on you as well as they do there, but they seem like some of them want to get rid of them.
Did members of your family do a lot of hunting and fishing when you were growing up?
And my husband liked to hunt and fish. When I was growing up, there wasn't any boys in our family to hunt.
Did your husband like to hunt coons, squirrels, birds?
Coon, and we like to coon hunt, possum hunting, and fishing. He really loved fishing. He didn't care too much for the deer hunting, but I have a son who comes back from Connecticut. He spends 2 weeks every fall deer hunting.
When children seem to be on their own these days in Patrick County, it's different from what it used to be.
Oh yeah, I think so. I think they think at 16 years old if they're on their own. And more since they can drive a car then. And I really think that is, because it's too young for them to drive a car, but they think they are grown.
How'd you meet your husband? We were raised right here close together. Only one oh yeah, when we were growing up, we had parties. And even school, when I was going to school, we would go from one school to another and do this dancing in a little game called Ding-a-ling-a-ling, Rock-a-dolly, and we would take off from school and go to another school and dance for an hour or two. And while we were growing up then, before going to dance, we would just call someone and say, how about us coming to your house for a dance tonight? And they said, that'd be fine. And the men and boys would go and take the beds down, take everything out of the room, take the curtains down, and we would dance. My husband, he would call figures. Even after my children and grandchildren were born, we'd still go and take the grandchildren along with us. Of course, you remember the Great Depression, when we had the effects had when we hit Patrick County. It was really a hard time then. You could hardly ever have a piece of money because there wasn't no way to make any. And we had, my husband hired a man helping for 25 cents a day to plow corn all day. We ate your food. Everything we had to eat. With the availability of the style of the gold change in expression, the shoes. Yeah, I would say the book that what did you do for fun during the depression? What did you and your family friends keep you spiritual? Well, I just don't think we had too much fun going on long back then. But we did have a car then, and we got out and rode around something because I was married to the depression and had 2 or 3 children. Is there anything in your life today that reminds you of the depression? Life better today than reminds you of the depression. What way? I'd say life much better today when I said we couldn't make it for Social Security and retirement checks and pensions. When you were growing up, how often did you travel from one part of the county to another? Outside the county? How often did you say? I can remember the first time I ever went to school. I went with my uncle and Motley Ford, and we went over and spent the night at Ben May's home. And his sister got married somewhere. We went to that wedding. I remember very well even the dress that I wore. I was just about 10 years old, I guess. What really made you need is transportation. Well, my uncle had a Motley Ford then, but when I was little and my dad's growing up, we had no cars. We had horses and buggies. And when I taught my first school, I rode horseback for 14 miles to school. Taught 1-room school, 7 grades, and had children in that as old as I was. Was there any friends on top? No, we didn't have one ourselves, but there was a Salmons man, John Salmons, who had one, and Mr. Elgin, they had service. I don't remember my dad. He could have had one, I can't remember. It seemed like I went to a wedding one time. We were at a double wedding, and I rode in one of those service. Taking photos, girls got married. Did the road improvements bring new people, new businesses, new influences in the Patrick County? Oh, I certainly did. Because these elastic pants has got people building closer to the wool line. The road steep to work. Remember then, I cut in the tall tail and told around the store, around the old pot-bellied store. I was just too little. And when my daddy died, and my uncle wouldn't allow us girls to come and stay in the store. And here there was tail that was told. But there is one here that I'd like to tell about the mountain man from Shooting Creek started came by Charity Church, and as he got there, he heard this, it was in the night, it was dark, and he heard this panther. So he ran in his Charity Church and shut the door. I think this was Jim Bill Hayes' wife's great-grandfather, John Allen. And he was a landowner, had a lot of land from Shooting Creek to Charity. So in passing, it was dark, and when he reached Charity, he heard this panther scream. So he made the log meeting house where the Primitive Baptist Church now stands. And as he closed the door, the panther was scratching the outside of the door. He had to use benches to prop the door for safety. And after spending that night in the house, the panther had disappeared during the night. Mr. Allen then started by spending a lonely night at the meeting house to return safe to his family the next morning. Ship Creek is near here. Do you know why? How did the rider's name? No, I always just heard that many people have got shot on Sugar Creek. And my husband's uncle washed away over there on Sugar Creek. He had a cloudburst, and he walked in town for 3 or 4 days, and the family was spotted hanging up in the tree, way down about 6-7 miles from where he was washed away. Can you think of anything else of interest that happened in your community? Well, now this didn't happen when I was living, but I've heard so much talk about the time that Ann Hall got killed, and my daddy had to go to Danville, and all the people around in the community was summons when she was killed. There was a mob of men, and I heard that someone come to this Charity Primitive Church and got under that church and met there, and my mother heard the shooting, and she was summoned to go to court, but it was before one of my sisters was born, and she didn't go down. My daddy had to go, and there were quite a few men in the neighborhood. Some of them had to pull time over that, but they always said they got the wrong person, but they killed this woman, shot through the door, and because they was after her brother who had been reporting people. And my mother, it was my husband's uncle who had for 10 years over there. And one day he was sentenced to 2 years, and the next day his sister was buried from having measles, and the next day my husband's daddy was buried. So I was 3 in one family. Something happened to him inside 3 days. Can you remember the impact of the radio on the family? Well, I remember the person we ever heard. There was a Bowman boy from North Carolina dating my sister. He brought the first one we ever seen and heard at our store. And at night we'd go sit out there and listen at it. And I remember so well that their first tunes I ever heard was my silver-haired daddy of mine and the old spinning wheel. That was years back. Because he let us keep it a while. What do you think about the change in lifestyle for women today? Yeah, I don't especially agree with it all. I like pantsuits. Some of them are fine. Some of them. Do you think people moving in from other states, maybe Secretary County? Oh, I know. I really think so, but a lot of people think there's going to be too much of them coming in here. But I enjoy having them. They're my best neighbors now, the folks who have moved in from around, because others are working. Everybody's working, and if anything happens, you have no one right close to you, except these new people are moving in. Yesterday, I had a couple came in and say they bought land over next to me, and they were Hatcher County owners, landowners now, and they were thrilled to death, and we're going to be moving in right away. And that makes me feel good. My son wants to come back to Connecticut. Bill here, and next year, why do you think people move to? Well, I heard the reason they're all coming out of New York, Long Island, New York, and New Jersey, and that, they say. This is interview number 2 with Ms. Ophelia Rakes of Charity, Patrick County, Virginia. I told you yesterday about how Charity got its name. There was a post office there at Charity when my daddy was living. And of course there's one at Hartsville too, between our house and Woolwine. And after that post office was taken out, there was a exchange box put on the porch, on one of the posts. And from there came 3 mail carriers. Early in the morning we had Mr. Will D. Hart from Woolwine, and long about 10:30 or 11 we would have Mr. Green Ratliff from Eaglesville. And later on in the afternoon, after Mr. Green Ratliff died, we had Mr. Amos Ball and Sam Pilson. Then from Endicott came J.G.L. Hash. And then there was another box over a few miles from home that they exchanged mail again that went to Farrell. And I can remember very well when I was young, and we had boyfriends from Endicott, and if we wanted to get a letter from our boys that wrote that day, we would ride with the mail carrier over to the Endicott exchange box, and he would give us our letter out of that. The highlight of us when we were little was the charity meetings, where we always called the communion service. And that was only once a year that we ever got an ice cream cone. And my uncle was a huckster, had a team of mules and wagon, and he hauled all of our eggs and butter and stuff, chickens to Roanoke. And he would bring back ice cream for our August meetings, as we always called it. And we would sell ice cream and lemonade. I remember very well my uncle and some of my uncle's brother-in-law would make lemonade in big old tubs. And you'd be going from the store down to the church, and they'd holler out, "Come buy your lemonade, buy your lemonade. Made by the Rakes and Robson, stirred in the shades, best it ever made." And we sold lots and lots of ice cream, and the children all in our neighborhood would save up their money from time before this meeting to get the ice cream, which was only 5 cents a cone then. And later on, after my uncle quit hauling from Roanoke, my mother helped, and we would sell ice cream there on the Sundays. And I can remember very well when my uncle was hauling, he had a big team of bay mules, and he couldn't pay for them. So he borrowed $200 from my oldest sister to pay for those mules. And in a little while, he sold out Floyd and went to Bassett. And he was a night watchman down there who, in the years after, he became very rich and was good to give all his children money. Well, I'd like to tell you a little bit about how we were dressed in our old times. My mama dressed us, all 6 of us little girls, in white dresses when we were little. And every night she would roll our hair on paper. And every one of us, I guess, had pictures made in the first little white dress with the ruffles all around the sleeves and on the bottom that my mother made. And later on, she made us white midi suits and was all of us girls, the way we could tell them apart was she put suitace braid on the collars and cuffs, and each one had a different color braid on it that we'd know was ours. But if we had to go on a trip anywhere, we were all so near the same size that we could borrow each other's dress and take along if we were going to spend the night. At one time, 4 of us girls, I remember very well, weighed 44 pounds each. So that shows we were right the same size. And late in wintertime, then we had blue serge mid-suits. Same way, they had different colored trimmings. And also, we were talking to my sisters yesterday about the outing gowns we had to sleep in. I can remember very well that I hung behind the door, and each one of us had a different colored gown that we knew was ours, and we went to bed that night. And we wore these wool dresses to school and had yarn stockings. My mother had to start in the spring of the year knitting stockings so we'd all have enough stockings to last the winter. And if we accidentally fell down and cut a hole in our stockings, Mama would have to darn it up, and sometimes on our knees it would be darned so thick that there was no danger of ever hurting your knee when you hit the rocks. We had to wear those high-top shoes to school. I can remember the fall of the year when our daddy would say, "Come on out the store," and he'd get us fit us up with a pair of shoes for the winter, and we had to make them shoes last us all the winter. We only had one pair each. And if I wanted to go away on for a few days, some of us, we'd have to borrow each other's clothes. And I had to borrow my older sister's, and it's always something would happen to the hose. There'd be a hole in them or running when I come back. I had that misfortune happen to me all the time. And she was real particular, too. She was when we had to sleep, 3 of us in the bed, and I can remember very well sleeping in the middle, and I wasn't allowed to touch one of my sisters because she was very touchy. She didn't want nobody touching her. When my daddy died, I was on 8 years old, and there was 7 of us living then. And he had $1,000 each for each one of us, and back in them days, that was quite a bit of money left in the bank for us. I remember so well the morning that my mother and uncle left in the buggy going to Stewart to get, said we had to have a guardian, and they went over there, and we never saw a penny of our money. Not one of us ever got anything to go to school on anything. They left before day in an open-top buggy, and I can remember they said, "Well, we have to go and get a guardian for you all," and we never knew what happened to our money. But there was nothing left for us to go to school on, and I remember very well how hard that my mama had to work. And at them times, she only had one nice blue suit to wear, and she had to take trips to attend to court business after my uncle left. We had a lot of court going on by the bills in the store, which wasn't made by my mother. And my youngest brother would find out my mother had to go to Roanoke or somewhere to trial, and he would grab my mama's blue suit and go down through the garden, keep her from going, because he was so spoiled. He was our only brother at that time, and we had spoiled him so much that he couldn't stand for his mother to be gone.
Did y'all have any snowballers in school?
Oh, yes, we used to snowball, and back of our house, of course we lived right at the school, and we always had to go up to come back for lunch, and we would meet there sometimes before school. Some of the pupils from school would come down, and we'd get on that hill there and get us a plank. All 8 or 10 of us would go down. And one morning, one of my girlfriends next door
came before school time, and we went after that. It was so hard we could hardly stand up on it. And she said, let us get on this plank and ride. We did, and we went down the bank of the front, and we hit the other side, and off she went, and I thought she was killed. Knocked her breath out of it, and it scared me to death. And one of our teachers that we had then was really liked snowballing and riding, and she would come down below the Brethren Church, then it was, and bring us all at 12 o'clock, and we'd all play down there for 1 hour. Then times we had an hour at noon for lunch. We had many a good time there.
Ms. Rakes, understand you have a story on the Nolan family. Tell me about that.
Yes, this is the story of the Nolans in America. It begins in the mid-1700s in a very romantic manner. Now, my husband's mother was a Nolan. And this all began in Ireland as two Irish brothers of the last name Nolan wanted to go to the United States so bad that they became stowaways on a ship headed for America. But somewhere between Ireland and the United States they were discovered. So when the ship docked at Jamestown, these brothers were split up and sold as indentured servants in order to pay their passage. One brother went to north to Canada and the other went to Halifax County, Virginia. The descendants of these two stowaways are now located all over the United States and Canada as well. The Nolan that went to Halifax County had many children. One of these was John. He moved and founded what is now Shooting Creek, Virginia. Here he married Judith Polly Thomas on February 13th in 1799. And of this union many children were born, and all were sturdy mountaineers, sons and daughters. The family and their immediate descendants were true mountaineers. They could not grow crops because there was not any declared land. And this caused them to turn to hunting, fishing, picking chestnuts, and making whiskey. In fact, moonshining and picking chestnuts for 3 to 4 cents a pound were their only source of income, so they were dependent upon this. There were numerous chestnut trees growing in this area during that time, but one year, for some unknown reason, every one of the trees died, almost wiping out the family. You can still go up in those mountains today and see the decayed remains of those trees, but there are no living ones. And now today I have a daughter who owns some land up in this part of Shooting Creek, Poplar Camp, and they enjoy going up there and hunting all these old chestnut stumps and taking them home and putting them in the yard for decoration. Now this John Nolan was a hard-working man who owned some slaves, and many of these slaves were nameless, so they had to acquire the last name of their master, Nolan. And there were many Negro descendants living in those mountains with that last name today. I also remember very well of one Negro descendant that is, my grandfather was Tuggle, and he had this boy, got him when he was about 10 years old, and he kept him with him, and my grandmother Robinson was by herself one day when he came, when he got married with my grandmother, and he picked up a chair and was going to hit my grandma Robinson. So it scared her, and from that day on, she would never let him stay with her anymore. And he went and stayed with the Rakes, old Uncle Lum Rakes, until he died. Then from there, he went to stay with his Lum son, Tyler, until he died. Then, when he died, he went to stay with one of Tyler's daughters in Roanoke. He lived right near here, and he was, Tuggle was his last name. Can't remember his first name. But anyway, he's buried in the Rakes Cemetery down just a few miles from here now. And during this lifetime now of John Nolan, he accumulated quite a lot of money, and enough to make a long bar of silver bullion when his dwelling caught fire and burnt to the ground.
He was a person of cheerful disposition and was remembered to have sung amusing songs as he was laid up in bed with a broken thigh. This injury finally resulted in his death. And his wife, Polly, was known as one of the most strong-minded women of her day. Surviving her husband by many years, she went to live with her well-to-do son, Charles. But she finally moved back to her old neighborhood in an old log-bodied house where she lived for many years with some of her slaves. There she lived was until almost helpless and could no longer keep house. Then she went into the home of another son who lived near her old home on Papa Camp Creek. Her years of widowhood were years of unhappiness, and she bore them without fault finding of a complaint. In this she exhibited the stoicism of philosopher. Many of her descendants, which number over 500, are wealthy and intelligent people. Among these have been squires, teachers, bankers, representatives, physicians, and lawyers. John and Polly were, as most people were of that community, strong, primitive Baptists. They were one of the first to construct the church near Shooting Creek at a place called Charity. This old church was built in 1789 and is still standing in use today. The beliefs of the primitive Baptists, or hard-shell Baptists as they were called, were very unusual. In order for a man to be a primitive Baptist preacher, he must not be able to read or write. For if he could, the people believed that he was not a true messenger of God. And any person could not join the church unless he had a vision from God. They believed in predestination, so they never worried about anything that happened. Sometimes the person killed another for no reason at all, and nothing ever done to them. They believed that if God had not meant for you to pull the trigger on the gun, that you would not have. The people of this community had extreme faith in their religion. One preacher was known to have a stutter, speech, and he could not speak to anyone outside the church clearly. But in the pulpit he raised the roof and clearly enunciated all his words, so that if you had not known him to have had a speaking problem, you could never have guessed it. Also, when the people were baptized, extreme cold water was never a bother. Can remember witnesses' baptism in the river where they had to break the ice before going in. The people involved never shivered or even caught cold. Now, Alexander Nolan was born of John and Polly Nolan and was the fifth of 7 children blessed to him. He was born in 1808, and he settled on the waters of Shooting Creek at the base of the Blue Ridge Mountains. There he was a farmer as well as a lumberman. He married Mary Turner, the daughter of Shady Turner of Patrick County. With the prospect of long life and honoring to spend the balance of his days in comfort and ease, he built for him and his 11 children a much larger house than he had been living in. Soon after this, typhoid fever broke out in his neighborhood, and one of his neighbors and several members of that family were stricken. Fear of the dreaded disease caused the stricken family to be isolated. But Alexander, known as Alec, was a kind man, so he visited them. He administered to their needs and their sufferings as best he could. But in defiance of all that could be done, the man and several of his children died, and their benefactor, Alexander, shared their fate and was laid to rest beside his wife in the family burial ground in their homestead. Now, Charles M. Nolan, the oldest of the Alexanders, was born in 1834, and he married Lucinda Thomas. She was a daughter of Joseph and Annie Thomas. Charles was a hard-working farmer who had just married when the war came up. He left his family and farm to go north where the action was. There he served under the Confederate flag throughout the bloody affair, being wounded in one of the later battles. His daughter, Cinderella, received a pension from this money many years later in the 1900s, and this Cinderella is my mother-in-law. And on March 4th, 1899, George, Charles' youngest son, drowned in the flash flood on Shooting Creek. It was 2 days before his body was found, and all the while Charles aided faithfully in moving the driftwood searching for his body, so anxious to find what would turn him to stone when discovered. He never saw another well day after this, and he soon died in the same year at the age of 65.
Charles's wife, Lucinda, was his faithful wife and mother. She had been a friend to all, and she was loved by all her neighbors. Nobody ever heard her speak an unkind word to anyone. She said after Charles's death that they had never had a quarrel as long as they lived, and at the age of 75, Lucinda died. On her tombstone are still the words that she requested to be on there. Eyes curtained by the draper of eternal sleep will never know again the touch of tears, nor the sad tidings of death ever fall on their ears. Now, Cinderella Nolan Rakes was the seventh of these 9 children. She was born to Charles and Lucinda, and she was born on December 22nd, 1879, at her home in Shooting Creek. She married a man of great potential wealth, Samuel T. Rakes. Sam Rakes was the son of Richard and Lucinda Rakes, and was an extremely wealthy man in Patrick County, owning great portions of land there. But after he and his wife died, all this was lost, and none went to his first children. Richard's wife died early after a business trip to Bassett one year. He married a girl of questionable character out of necessity rather than love. Richard soon died, and his new wife, Molly Dent, sold everything and left Virginia, never to be heard of again. And that is my husband's grandfather. Now, Cinderella Rakes was a woman of strong character and will. She was honest, straightforward, and a good mother. Sam blessed her with 5 children, of which she raised 4 of them ranging in ages from 2 to 6 years, all by herself. Her youngest daughter, Selah, died at the age of 3 months with the measles. And all within 3 days, 3 months after Selah's death, Sam died of measles, his sister died of measles, and his brother was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The latter brother had been accused of killing Ann Hall, a wife of a suspected informer. Her husband was believed to have told revenue officials of a still that was in operation at a nearby church. One night after this, an angry mob of men with torches and guns went to their house. Responding to the outside disturbance, Ann poked her head out of the window, where it was immediately met with a load of buckshot. Sam's brother was so scared that he went back to the church, where he hid and got drunk. The next morning he found himself in jail, accused of the murder. After Sam's death, Cinderella, as she was known by her friends, never remarried. She never worked a day in her life for anyone, but continuously slaved at home, raising her 4 children and keeping up the farm. She had a garden and a cow and mules. Granny, as we always called her, was a great cook and was said to have been able to stretch $1 worth of groceries into 10. But many times they were so poor that all they had to eat for breakfast was cornbread and blackberries. She never went to school, but she could read the Bible and print her name. She was a brave person even to the end. She knew that she had cancer for 5 years before she told anyone. In these last years, she suffered from several serious ailments, but never once did she complain. She would always manage to take care of herself, since she had such a dread of becoming a burden to anyone. And on February the 9th, 1968, she died quietly in bed. Her son, George Rakes, who was my husband, he was born on November 28, 1901. He married Ophelia Robinson, daughter of George and Ella Robinson, on May the 19th, 1925, in Knoxville, Tennessee. They made their home at Papa Camp near Shooting Creek. Grandpa Rakes had almost no education whatsoever, but was known to be one of the smartest men around. He had more than his share of common sense, and he could discuss politics or any current event intelligently as an educated man. He loved to hunt and fish, especially enjoyed coon hunting, and engaged in sport until a few years before his death. He was always the man to see about some good coon dogs, and you could always count on him for a good fish yarn or an old-time tale. He could spin some really tall tales, and he never tired of them. He was the type of person that his children's friend would call Daddy, and lots of times the phrase, "He's the type of person I wish my daddy was heard." He was always kind, understanding, never criticized, and joy to all who knew him. He was a great dancer, and many times he did the calling at the dances. He played the fiddle, the banjo, and the Jew's harp. And he loved children. Everybody was always welcome at his home. He died on February 5th, 1969. His father, John O. Nolan, Dad's father, was a veteran of World War I, where he served in the cavalry as a PIC. His home was a very religious place. He was a strong reverend and did not allow his family to pat their feet to music or play cards or even joke much. He died in 1953 with creeping paralysis. Now, my dad is one of those men who are considered to be jack of all trades and a master at none. He is a strong Democrat, and the brethren turn to a Baptist. He is very narrow-minded and old-fashioned, but there are not many to be found better than him. Family tree ends with me, Roscoe Kent Nolan. I was born January the 9th, 1954 at Marshall General Hospital. At the time of my birth, it was requested by my mother, who was still under influence, that everyone stand and sing Amazing Grace. I received my elementary education at John Maynard Smith School and my secondary education at Theodore Collinsville High School. I am a Baptist and independent, and am now attending Patrick Henry College, and from there I went to Blacksburg. I then planned to go to DPI Blacksburg, where I will major in mathematics. I am now a CPA. I would like to say in family of the 7 children who are now yet living. My mother died at age 71, my daddy at 40, and all 7 of us children are still living, and the oldest in 76 and the youngest in 66. We live right here in Patrick County, except one who lives in North Carolina.